Last month, the Department of Justice, along with the Department of Education, a group of state attorneys general, announced an agreement to settle litigation against Education Management Corporation, the second largest for-profit college chain in America. EDMC was found to have been engaged in fraud and deception when it told the federal government it was complying with federal laws that prohibited incentive compensation to be paid to recruiters. For EDMC recruiters, students essentially had a bounty on their heads. The more students they signed up for their for-profit colleges, the more bonus and perks the recruiters could receive, like trips to places like Cancun and Las Vegas, Starbucks gift cards, expensive candies, tickets to sporting events. The saying at EDMC, as they were recruiting young people to attend these for-profit colleges, really tells the whole story. The recruiters needed only find students with, quote, a pulse and a Pell to sign up. What they're referring to, of course, is low-income students eligible for over $5,000 in Pell Grants, $5,000 that would flow to this for-profit college, regardless of whether the students were getting a good education or not. U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch referred to this school as a, quote, recruitment mill, close quote. And what was the result of this recruitment mill? While these illegal practices were taking place, EDMC reportedly took in, listen to this, $11 billion in federal funds, $11 billion in taxpayer funds. Under the settlement, the company was fined $90 million. $11 billion, $90 million. Well, how about the executives who masterminded the scheme to sign up young people so that their Pell Grants and government loans would flow to the for-profit college, regardless of whether they ever finished school or ended up with a diploma that was worth anything? Whatever happened to these people who engineered this scheme that cost federal taxpayers $11 billion, students almost $11 billion in debt, and a fine by the government of $90 million? So far, they're getting off scot-free. Todd Nelson, CEO of EDMC until 2012, received over $25 million personally in total compensation during his 5 years. The settlement didn't include any accountability for him. And now, Mr. Nelson is the CEO of another for-profit education company that's under massive state and federal scrutiny, the Career Education Corporation. What about the students who were lured by EDMC's illegal recruitment mill, pressured by the company's high-pressure boiler room tactics into mountains of student debt? They can't find jobs many times, and they certainly can't repay their loans. Attorney General Lynch called EDMC's tactics a violation of the trust placed in them by the students. More than 40 state attorneys general accused the company of deception and misleading recruitment. So let's be clear. This was not just a case of EDMC lying to the federal government. Students were the victims. I encourage the Department of Education to use the evidence the Department of Justice and attorneys general have in this case to provide federal student loan relief to students who were harmed by Education Management Corporation. But make no mistake, if the students are spared the student debt from these fly-by-night for-profit colleges, ultimately the taxpayers will be the losers as well. We provided the money to the students that flowed to the schools, and now everyone's a loser, including the taxpayers. Oh, not the officers of the company. They walked away with millions of dollars in compensation. There's one thing that I always say at this point to make my case, and I have never, ever heard a rebuttal from the for-profit colleges. For-profit colleges educate about 10% of all of the high school graduates in America. Who are the major for-profit colleges? Biggest ones, University of Phoenix. Kaplan is another large one. DeVry University out of the city of Chicago. These are for-profit schools. About 10% of high school grads go to these for-profit colleges. The for-profit colleges, as an industry, receive 20% of all the federal aid to education. 10% of the students, 20% of the federal aid, their tuition is so high. Students have to go deeper in debt than if they'd chosen a community college or a public university. But here's the number to remember. 10% of the students, 44% of student loan defaults occur with students who attended for-profit colleges and universities. Almost half of the students who end up going to these for-profit schools default on their student loans. Don't forget, student loans, student debt is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. A 19 or 20-year-old student and their parents who sign up for these student loans have signed up for a debt for life. It cannot be discharged. They'll take it to the grave. We actually have seen efforts to secure Social Security payments from the parents who co-sign these loans when the student defaults. 10% of the students in for-profit schools, 44% of the student loan defaults. Well, the EDMC news came on the heels of a major announcement by Westwood College, one of the worst actors in the for-profit college industry. Westwood announced it would stop enrolling students in campuses nationwide, including the 4 it operates in the Chicagoland area, praise the Lord. Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan sued Westwood for engaging in deceptive practices. Madigan's suit focused specifically on Westwood's criminal justice program, one of the first that I heard about that really raised my interest in this for-profit college industry. In order to lure students into their criminal justice program, Westwood College convinced students they could get jobs with the Chicago Police Department and the Illinois State Police. What happened when these students actually graduated from Westwood College, this for-profit school? They took their degrees to the employers, and the employers laughed at them. They didn't recognize the Westwood degree. In fact, it reached a point where they said to the student, you know, you'd be better off, don't include Westwood College on your resume. Just say you didn't go to school. You'll have a better chance. The Attorney General recently reached a settlement with Westwood under which it would forgive $15 million in private student loans for Illinois students. Now it appears the company as a whole may be on its way out. That's the trend in this industry, as students and parents across America are starting to realize these for-profit schools are bad news, and state and federal regulators are shining a light on their illegal tactics. Enrollment is declining. When it came to the University of Phoenix, at one point, I think they had over 500,000 students. Now they're down to less than half that amount. Along with the decline in enrollment, stock prices on these private corporations are plummeting. Years of bad behavior is starting to catch up with these companies, but the damage is really done for the students. Many of their lives have been harmed, if not ruined, by this debt. And of course, damage to the federal treasury, which shells out billions, that's with a B, billions of dollars to the for-profit colleges that the taxpayers will never get back. And yet, the other party continues to come to the aid of the for-profit college industry, attempting to block any steps to ensure for-profit colleges are following the law and held accountable. We saw it earlier this year. The junior senator from Florida came to the aid of the disreputable Corinthian colleges. While Corinthian was lying to students about its job placement rates, suckering them into enrolling, saddling them with debt, the junior senator from Florida was writing to the Department of Education asking them to demonstrate leniency to Corinthian. Leniency to a company that made misrepresentations to students, lied to the government, and swindled taxpayers out of billions of dollars. That's the junior senator from Florida's answer. If Republicans are willing to defend Corinthian, it shouldn't be a surprise they want to shield for-profit colleges from what's known as the gainful employment rule. The Department of Education has developed responsible criteria for determining whether career education programs really do prepare students for gainful employment. That's required by law. The gainful employment rule ensures that students who graduate from a covered program of study are able to get a job that allows them to manage the student debt they take on in the process. The point is to protect students from worthless post-secondary programs that leave them saddled with debt and unable to get a good job. The point is also to protect federal taxpayers by cutting off federal funding to programs of study that don't really prepare students for a job. But for the for-profit college industry and their friends in Congress, they hate this rule. Why? As an industry, for-profit colleges, as I mentioned earlier, enroll 10% of the students and account for more than 40% of the student loan defaults. They take in $25 billion in Title IV dollars annually. If they were a federal agency, the for-profit colleges and university would be the 9th largest federal agency in America. Is this private sector? Is this the free market? Or is this crony capitalism that survives on massive federal subsidies? The for-profit colleges and universities are the most heavily subsidized private industry in America. Their business model depends on easy access to federal funds and the ability to spend as little as possible on quality education. They spend more money on advertising than they do on teaching. Earlier this year, the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia dealt a devastating blow to this industry's attempts to block the gainful employment rule. The court upheld the rule in its entirety. This was the second U.S. District Court to do so. Having been embarrassed in federal court, the for-profit college industry has turned to my friends on the other side of the aisle to protect them. They attached a rider to the appropriation bills that fund education programs, and they're pushing to include it in the final spending bill this year to stop the Department of Education from enforcing the existing law on gainful employment. How can we as members of Congress block implementation of this common sense rule in light of what just happened with Corinthian? This company was inflating its job placement rates to lure new students, defrauding the students and taxpayers, and lying to the accreditors and federal government. When they collapsed, when Corinthian went down, more than 70,000 students were left in peril, many with more debt than they can ever possibly repay, and a Corinthian education that is worthless. Now is not the time for Congress to meddle in the Department of Education's efforts to protect taxpayers, students, and their families, and to prevent another Corinthian collapse. The department estimates that nearly 1,400 programs of study, 99% of them at for-profit colleges, will fail under this basic rule. That's why the industry is in a mad dash to find political sponsors to save them from accountability. Programs have to fail the rule 2 out of 3 consecutive years to be cut out of federal funding. So the institutions do have an opportunity to improve. If they don't, we shouldn't just continue to blindly send billions in federal taxpayer dollars to these companies. With all that we know about the for-profit college industry and their fraudulent and deceptive practices, I can't believe my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are prepared to fight a rule that is nothing more than a way to protect students and taxpayers. But here we are, facing the prospect of a policy rider, substantive legislation in a spending bill to shield for-profit colleges from being held accountable and delivering on their promises to students. Well, I'm going to resist that, and I hope my colleagues will join me. It isn't just a matter of making certain that these schools follow the law. It is a matter of protecting students and families from being exploited, going in for an education and ending up with nothing other than debt, and protecting taxpayers who are sending $25 billion a year to this industry. Mr. President, we have had some heated debates on the floor here, talking about people receiving food stamps, perhaps $180 a month in food stamps, and whether they are deserving, and whether this is a ripoff of taxpayers. $180 for food. And when it comes to $25 billion for an industry that has shown over and over again that is the source of 44% of student loan defaults, to the misery of the students and families who are victims of it, some of these same people critical of food stamp fraud turn a blind eye. Oh, this is just business. Don't be afraid of making a profit. I salute businesses that make a profit if they do it honestly, honorably, and they do it with competition. This industry is taking advantage of federal tax dollars in a way no other industry in America is.